The room should have been filled with soft music and polite smiles, but everything stopped the moment the ballroom doors opened. Florence stepped inside wearing a calm expression that didn't match the storm she brought with her. 4 toddlers clung to her, 2 in her arms, 2 walking beside her, each child carrying the same unmistakable features as Wilson. Guests froze mid-whisper. The band fell silent. Marisol's bouquet slipped slightly in her grip. For a heartbeat, no one dared to breathe. Then one of the toddlers, Marcus, saw Wilson across the aisle. His small face lit up, and he broke into an excited run. "Daddy." The word echoed louder than the music ever could. Gasps swept through the hall. Chairs scraped. People stood, confused and stunned. Wilson's entire world tilted, his past and present crashing into each other in front of everyone he hoped to impress. He thought replacing Florence would fix everything. He thought choosing a quieter life would calm the pressure. He thought burying the truth would keep his image spotless. Instead, the truth walked straight into his wedding, holding his children. Have you ever given someone everything, only to watch them choose someone else? Have you ever watched the truth you tried to forget show up at the exact moment you needed it hidden the most? Stay with me, because this story exposes how choices made in silence eventually return, louder than ever. What happens next isn't just about love. It's about consequences, pride, regret, and a man who learned far too late that running from responsibility only delays the impact. If you're watching this, don't go anywhere. You're about to witness how one decision can break a family, and how another can rebuild it in the most unexpected way. Welcome back to Mr. Michael Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales, where yesterday's quiet sacrifices echo into today's hardest choices. Here, we unwrap the hidden truths of everyday lives, where family ties are tested, broken, and sometimes, miraculously, restored. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. Chicago's Gold Coast glittered at night in a way that made tourists gasp and longtime residents shrug. To outsiders, it symbolized achievement, luxury, and access to a world only a few could enter. But inside a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Wilson Hartman stood his floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the city lights with the kind of emptiness only a man who had everything could understand. To most, Wilson lived a dream life. He was a respected real estate millionaire. He owned a penthouse, 2 European cars, a private office in a high-rise, and a reputation people envied. But the truth was quieter. He often stood exactly where he was now, alone, hands in his pockets, asking himself how it was possible for a man surrounded by success to feel so painfully hollow. It wasn't depression. It wasn't sadness. It was something more subtle and more exhausting. The persistent realization that nothing in his world felt alive anymore. The sparkle of business wins had faded years ago. The excitement of closing deals had dulled. Even the applause he received at charity events sounded rehearsed. His home, beautiful and expensive, felt like a museum, polished, silent, and cold. Behind him, a door opened softly. Celeste, his wife, stepped into the living room. Her footsteps were light and familiar, but the atmosphere between them had shifted long ago. Marriage had become something they maintained, not something they lived. Her voice was gentle. "You're working late again." Wilson didn't turn yet. "Just thinking." "You think a lot lately," she replied, coming closer but not close enough to touch his arm the way she used to years ago. "You okay?" "Yeah," he lied, still watching the faint ripples across the lake. Celeste stood beside him and gazed at the same city that filled him with quiet dread. She had once been the source of his calm, a soft-spoken college sweetheart, who believed in loyalty, structure, and staying out of chaos. She still carried those qualities. Nothing about Celeste had changed, except everything that mattered. They had grown in different directions without meaning to, without arguing, without betrayal. Just 2 people drifting apart while trying to pretend love was still holding the center. Celeste sighed. "Dinner's in the kitchen if you get hungry." "Thanks." She walked away, and the door clicked shut behind her. The small sound echoed through the penthouse like a reminder. There was distance between them that neither of them knew how to bridge. Wilson rubbed his brow, frustrated with himself. It wasn't that Celeste was unkind or unworthy. She was steady, loyal, predictable, But their conversations had become short updates, not meaningful exchanges. They didn't laugh anymore. They didn't dream anymore. They didn't even argue, because arguing requires passion, and passion had left the relationship long ago. Marriage had turned into polite coexistence. Sometimes Wilson wondered whether people who looked up at his penthouse imagined a man celebrating life every day. They would never believe how often he sat alone at the dining table with untouched food, replaying questions he didn't have the courage to say out loud. How did I get here? Why does everything feel so empty? What's missing? He walked to the kitchen, now out of habit more than hunger. The silverware was perfectly arranged, the counter spotless, the refrigerator stocked with things he rarely touched. Celeste had left him a plate of salmon and roasted potatoes, covered neatly with foil. It should have made him feel cared for. Instead, it reminded him of how silent their home was. He sat down, peeled back the foil, and stared at the food. He lifted his fork, put it down, and sighed. His appetite faded again. A marriage counselor once told him, sometimes love doesn't disappear. It just stops speaking the same language. At the time, Wilson brushed off the comment. Now it echoed in his mind. His phone vibrated on the table, an email from one of his business partners reminding him of a deal closing tomorrow morning. It should have excited him. Instead, he felt tired. He pushed the plate away and walked back into the living room. Chicago looked lively tonight, the highways alive with red and white streams of traffic, the water shimmering under distant boats, the skyline glowing like a crown atop the city, but none of it reached him. He checked the time. 8:47 p.m. Another night slipping away, offering nothing but reflection and discomfort. He loosened his tie, tossed it on the couch, and muttered under his breath, something has to change. But he didn't know what. Not yet. Not until the night he would meet a woman whose laugh alone made him feel awake again. A woman whose presence would shake his world and stitch cracks he forgot were there. A woman who would eventually carry 4 small lives that looked just like him. But that was still months away. Tonight, he was just a man aching for connection and sitting inside a life that sparkled on the outside and echoed on the inside. A faint argument between neighbors drifted through the window. A dog barked on the street below. Life was happening everywhere, except in his own chest. He rubbed his face again, sat down, and leaned back into the couch with a long exhale. He didn't know Florence yet. He didn't know how meeting her would unravel the quiet routines of his existence. He didn't know how much love he was capable of. He didn't know how much damage he was capable of either. All he knew was this: he was tired of being lonely next to someone he once loved deeply. Celeste walked past the hallway again to retrieve her cup of tea. She paused when she saw him sitting there. "Do you want to talk?" she asked softly. Wilson shook his head. "Not tonight." She nodded. No hurt, no argument, just acceptance, the saddest part of all. She walked back to the bedroom and closed the door. He let his head fall back against the couch cushion, eyes closing for a moment. That was the exact moment he realized success meant nothing when the heart remained untouched. His phone vibrated again. Another message about tomorrow's meeting. He ignored it. For the first time in months, business could wait. He stood, walked once more to the window, and whispered to himself, "I need more than this. I need something real." He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow night at a charity gala in downtown Chicago, his entire life would shift. But for tonight, he remained a man trapped between the life he built and the life he longed for. Before we continue, please tap the like button. It helps this story reach more people and keeps our channel growing. Thank you for supporting Mr. Michael's stories. Chicago's downtown glowed with a soft evening warmth, the kind that wrapped itself around the tall buildings and made the city feel both busy and welcoming. The charity gala at the Wexford Grand Hall was the talk of the week, an annual gathering where business leaders, philanthropists, and Chicago's elite showed up in their finest to raise funds for community art programs. Cars lined the entrance, with suited attendants opening doors and greeting guests as they entered the shimmering lobby. Inside, the hall was bright with gold lighting and crisp white decor. The orchestra tuned quietly on the stage, glasses clinked as servers wove between tables, and guests filled the space with polite laughter. The air hummed with sophistication, something Wilson had grown used to after years of attending these kinds of events. He adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the room out of habit, not excitement. Events like this used to energize him. Now they felt like another duty on a long list of obligations. He greeted a few familiar faces, business colleagues, investors, and donors, who saw him as part of the fabric of Chicago's financial crowd. They shook his hand, congratulated him on another successful quarter, and discussed developments in the real estate market. Wilson nodded at all the right places, smiled when expected, and sipped champagne without tasting it. The emptiness from the night before hadn't faded. It followed him here. But then something shifted in the room. Someone walked in. Not just anyone. Not just another guest in a designer gown or tailored suit. Florence. She didn't rush or announce herself. She stepped through the arched entryway with an unhurried grace that drew attention without trying. Her dress, a soft shade of coral with smooth lines, complemented her skin beautifully. Her hair fell in gentle waves down her shoulders, framing her warm face. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't boast or beg for attention but still managed to pull every gaze in the room toward her. Wilson noticed her before he even realized he was watching. His casual glance transformed into a full pause. His breath hitched slightly, not in shock but in recognition of something he didn't understand yet. There was something in the way she moved, gentle, grounded, almost glowing, in a room full of polished surfaces and constructed elegance. One of the event organizers welcomed her enthusiastically. "Florence, so glad you made it." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Wouldn't miss it." Her voice carried just enough for Wilson to hear it across the room, and it surprised him. He expected a sharper tone, something bold to match her presence. Instead, it was warm and smooth, an easy contrast to the stiff conversations around him. Florence Jackson was well known in Chicago's fashion and art circles. A working model with Southern roots, she had returned from several international shoots earlier that year. She had gained a reputation for her charitable work as much as her beauty. Tonight, though, she wasn't here for attention. She came with purpose, quietly signing in at the reception desk and thanking the staff with sincerity. Wilson couldn't stop watching. "Wilson, everything all right?" his colleague Walter asked. Wilson blinked out of his focus. "Yeah, just looking around." Walter followed his gaze and let out a soft laugh. "Ah, that explains it. I wasn't—" Wilson tried, but Walter was already drifting toward another group. Wilson turned back toward Florence. She was making her way into the main hall, stopping occasionally to greet familiar faces. She hugged one of the older photographers who practically melted with warmth, then complimented a designer on her jewelry. There was no arrogance in her movements, no performance, just authenticity, and that stirred something deep in Wilson, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He took a sip of champagne and found he still wasn't tasting it. Florence eventually reached the bar. She rested her elbow lightly against the counter, scanning the room as she waited for her drink. She seemed comfortable even alone, observing without judgment, smiling when something amused her. Wilson debated approaching her. It wasn't in his nature to hesitate, but tonight felt different. His heart gave a small, unfamiliar jump as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, forcing himself toward the bar. He stood a polite distance away from her. She glanced at him once, offering a courteous nod. He returned it, unsure if he should speak. Luckily, the bartender chose that moment to ask her, "What can I get for you tonight?" "Just sparkling water with lime, please." Her voice again, gentle but assured, settled into his mind like a melody. When the bartender turned to him, Wilson said, "Same for me." Florence raised an eyebrow playfully. "Matching orders already?" He chuckled softly. "Pure coincidence. I think that's what they all say," she replied with a teasing smile. He smiled back. "I'm Wilson. Florence." They shook hands, a simple gesture that lingered just long enough for both of them to notice. "So," she asked, leaning slightly on the bar, "do you come to these events often, or is this one of those my assistant insisted situations?" He appreciated the humor, a little of both. "I'm usually here supporting the fundraising side." "You?" "I'm here for the community projects they're trying to support. Grew up in Memphis. We didn't always have access to art programs, so when I can help kids get it here, I show up." That tugged at something in him. Sincerity always did. "That's admirable," he said. She glanced at him sideways. "You say that like you mean it." "I do." Their drinks arrived, and Florence lifted her glass in a small, casual toast. "To showing up, then." He tapped his glass to hers. "To showing up." They took a sip. Wilson felt more awake from that moment than from the drink itself. "What do you do, Wilson, besides matching my drink orders?" she asked. "Real estate. Developments, mostly." "Oh," she teased lightly. "One of those people who change skylines." He gave a quiet laugh. "Something like that. Must be interesting. Watching the city grow because of your work." "It used to be," he admitted before catching himself. She noticed. She didn't pry, but tucked that information away with a gentle nod. "And you?" he asked. "Modeling, right?" "Yes. Been in it for a while now. Started small, worked my way up. Travel a lot. Meet all kinds of people. It's chaotic at times, but rewarding. Do you miss home?" "Always," she said without hesitation. "Nothing beats Southern food and Sunday dinners." "That sounds nice." "It is. My family's loud, opinionated, loving. Everything I needed growing up." Wilson imagined that instantly. A lively household filled with laughter, warmth, and connection. Everything his penthouse lacked. Everything he quietly craved. "You look like someone who could use a loud, opinionated dinner or two," she said jokingly. He laughed. A genuine laugh. The first one he'd released freely in weeks. "You might be right." A moment of comfortable silence passed between them. The hall lights caught the gentle shimmer of her dress, and Wilson found himself studying her calm expression, the steadiness beneath her charm. "So," she said, shifting her weight slightly, "are you here alone tonight?" The question wasn't flirtatious, just curious. Wilson paused. He thought of Celeste, of their conversations that had faded into routine, of their marriage that existed in structure but not in spirit. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm alone." Florence nodded in understanding. She didn't push for details. "Well," she said softly, "I'm glad you didn't stay home tonight." He felt that more deeply than he expected. For the first time in a long time, Wilson didn't feel like he was performing. He didn't feel like a millionaire expected to impress a crowd. He felt seen, steady, present. And Florence? She stood there like a sunrise, warm, bright, and full of possibility, without even trying. Their conversation warmed, branching into humor about Chicago traffic, fashion, mishaps during photo shoots, and childhood stories from Memphis and Wisconsin. She talked about her mother, her younger relatives, her love for working with kids. Wilson shared lighter parts of his life too, deliberately avoiding the weightier truths for now. The orchestra began a soft piece, signaling that guests would soon take their seats. Florence checked her small purse. "Looks like they're about to start," she said. "Right," he replied, reluctant for the moment to end. She took a small step back, then leaned in a bit. "It was nice meeting you, Wilson." "You too, Florence." As she walked toward her table, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of curiosity, interest, life. It startled him, but in a way he welcomed. He watched her sit down gracefully, engaging easily with those around her. She didn't put on a show or try to impress anyone. She simply existed with warmth, and it drew people toward her. Wilson found his own seat, but his mind didn't settle. Not on the speeches, not on the announcements, not on the donors being recognized, only on the woman whose presence had shifted the entire room without raising her voice or demanding attention. He didn't understand why she affected him this way, but he knew one thing for certain. Something inside him had just woken up. He wasn't the same man who walked into the gala tonight, and Florence had no idea the impact she would soon have on his quiet, aching world. Florence hadn't expected the gala to linger in her mind the way it did. She attended dozens of events every year, fashion shows, art fundraisers, networking dinners, but something about this one stayed with her. More specifically, someone did. After the orchestra finished their final piece and guests began to drift toward the exits, Florence found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with Wilson. It wasn't long or dramatic, yet it carried something meaningful, an unexpected moment of connection that felt genuine in a world where many conversations were layered with pretense. Wilson didn't chase after her. He didn't ask for anything, but his sincerity stayed with her long after she stepped into her car. That night, Wilson walked into his penthouse with a feeling he couldn't easily categorize. He loosened his tie and draped his jacket over a chair, but the emptiness he usually felt upon coming home wasn't as heavy. Something had shifted inside him, and he felt it in the quiet moments between breaths. He went into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The gala should have felt like every other one, but all he could think about was Florence's smile, the way her eyes brightened when she spoke about Memphis, the softness in her voice when she mentioned Sunday dinners, the humor in her tone when she teased him about drink orders. He glanced at the clock. 10:58 p.m. Too late to call anyone, but not too late to think. He walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and replayed their conversation, each line, each glance, until a quiet realization settled in. He felt more alive in those brief moments with Florence than he had in years. He shook his head as if trying to dismiss it, but the thought remained. She wasn't just beautiful, she was warm, grounded, real, and she carried the spirit of someone who had lived, struggled, grown, and healed, all with grace. He hadn't felt drawn to someone like this since he couldn't even remember when. He picked up his phone, then set it down again. Picked it up, set it down. After a few minutes of internal debate, he sent a simple message. I enjoyed talking with you tonight. No expectations, no flirtation, just honesty. He wasn't sure she would reply. Florence had just finished her nighttime skincare routine and was standing in front of her dresser when her phone buzzed. She picked it up and saw Wilson's name on the screen. A soft smile tugged at her lips. She opened the message and read it twice. Her fingers hovered for a moment before she responded. Same here. It was refreshing. She placed the phone on her nightstand, expecting the conversation to end there. It didn't. The phone buzzed again. Wilson, couldn't sleep? Florence, not yet. Long day. You? Wilson, can't stop thinking about the conversations I didn't realize I needed. She settled into her pillows, intrigued. Florence, that sounds deep for almost midnight. Wilson, maybe. Or maybe I'm just finally paying attention to myself. Their messages continued, light at first, then a little more honest. The kind of honesty that appears when two people feel unexpectedly safe with each other. Florence, do you ever slow down? Wilson, physically? Sometimes. Mentally? Almost never. Florence, you should try it. Your mind deserves rest too. Wilson, you sound like someone who's figured out balance. Florence, far from it. But I'd try. The conversation moved into gentle stories from their lives. She told him about growing up in Memphis, the crowded kitchens, the smell of her mother's cornbread, the laughter that echoed louder than the TV during Sunday dinners. He shared memories of his Wisconsin childhood, quiet nights, strict routines, and the feeling of always trying to meet expectations he didn't fully understand. Florence could tell he wasn't used to discussing personal details. She sensed carefulness in his words, as if he were afraid of revealing too much. But he kept talking, slowly peeling back layers he didn't even know he had let harden. At one point, Florence wrote, "You sound lonely, Wilson." He stared at the message for a long moment. He typed, stopped, typed again. Wilson, sometimes it's easy to be lonely when everything looks perfect from the outside. Florence, I get that more than you know. Her response touched something deep in him. For once, someone understood without needing a full explanation. Their conversation lasted until nearly 2 a.m. When Florence finally said goodnight, Wilson found himself wishing the night would stretch a little longer. He fell asleep on his couch, phone in hand. The next few days followed a similar pattern. They exchanged messages in the morning, light check-ins during the afternoon, and longer conversations at night. They didn't label anything, didn't define anything. They simply communicated in ways that made both of them feel present. A week later, Wilson asked if she'd like to grab coffee. Florence agreed. They chose a small cafe near Millennium Park, a quiet corner spot known for its warm pastries and soft jazz playlist. Wilson arrived early and waited by the window, somehow nervous and calm at the same time. Florence arrived with a soft smile and a scarf around her neck. You waited long? Not at all. Good. I hate making people wait. I hate being early, but here we are. They laughed. They ordered their drinks, his black coffee, her caramel latte, and sat by the window watching people walk by outside. Their conversation flowed as easily as it had through text messages. No heavy tension, no pressure, just two people exploring each other's worlds with curiosity and sincerity. She told him about her modeling experiences, traveling for shoots, dealing with early call times, finding humor in wardrobe malfunctions, and navigating an industry where confidence and vulnerability often lived side by side. He told her about business deals, about building projects from the ground up, about managing teams and partnerships, and about how success felt strangely disconnected from fulfillment. "You're chasing something," she said, watching him closely. Maybe you're trying to stop running from something." He paused. "Florence, how do you always see right through me?" She shrugged lightly. "I listen. Most people don't." Her words lingered. They walked out of the cafe after an hour, unsure if they wanted the morning to end. The sky had turned overcast, thick clouds gathering above the city. Florence wrapped her scarf a little tighter. "Looks like rain," she said. "Let's walk a little before it starts," Wilson suggested. They strolled through the park, staying close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. They pointed at street performers, shared stories about childhood mishaps, and found comfort in the simplicity of their steps. Halfway down the walkway, raindrops began falling, slow at first, then heavier. People scattered, running for shelter. Florence laughed softly, looking up at the sky. "We should probably," but the rain poured faster, soaking them. They ran toward the nearest coffee shop awning, but when they reached it, they were already drenched. Wilson shook his hands like a child, water spraying from his sleeves. "You're a mess," she said, laughing. "You're not exactly dry either." She brushed water from her forehead and looked at him, really looked at him. Their laughter softened, replaced by something quiet and charged. He stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to show intention. Her breathing slowed. For a moment, neither moved. Rain fell around them. People hurried past, cars splashed through puddles, yet everything felt distant. Florence whispered, "Wilson, what are we doing?" He swallowed. "I don't know. But I know I haven't felt this alive in years." She searched his eyes, unsure, hesitant, but drawn in by the truth she saw in his expression. "Tell me something honest," she said. He didn't hesitate. "I'm not happy," he admitted. "I haven't been for a long time. My marriage is surviving, not living, and meeting you made me realize how numb I've become." Florence lowered her eyes. "I don't want to be someone's escape." "You're not an escape," he said gently. "You're a reminder of what connection feels like." She lifted her gaze slowly, rain still dripping from her lashes. And in that quiet, bold moment, where hesitation met vulnerability, they moved toward each other naturally. Their lips met in a soft, searching kiss, not rushed, not forceful, just honest. It was the kind of kiss that didn't ask for permission, only understanding. The rain fell harder, but neither cared. They stood under the awning, finding warmth in each other despite the cold air around them. When they finally pulled away, Florence stepped back first. "This can get complicated," she said softly. "I know. We need to be careful." "I know. And we need to be honest." "I will be." She held his gaze a moment longer, then whispered, "Okay." The moment sealed something between them, something neither could ignore anymore. Something real, fragile, and alive. When they walked away from the awning, the rain had lightened into a steady sprinkle. They walked side by side again, but now with a connection acknowledged and a truth spoken into existence. Wilson knew then, this was the beginning of something profound, something that would change everything. And Florence felt it too. Wilson woke up the next morning with the memory of Florence's kiss still warm in his mind. It wasn't a reckless moment or a stolen thrill, it was clarity. For the first time in years, something inside him felt aligned, honest, awake. But clarity didn't erase reality. He still had a marriage, one that had been emotionally numb for years but legally intact. And carrying on with Florence while leaving that truth unresolved was a line he refused to cross. So, that morning, after pacing his kitchen with a cup of untouched coffee, he made the decision he'd been avoiding for months. A decision he knew was overdue long before Florence ever entered his life. He approached Celeste with quiet resolve. She was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through emails with her reading glasses perched on her nose. When she looked up, she noticed something different. The seriousness in his expression, the weight of a truth he could no longer carry quietly. "Celeste," he began, his voice steady but soft. She removed her glasses, folding them neatly on the table. "Is something wrong?" He hesitated. "Not out of doubt, but out of respect. I think we both know we've been living beside each other, not with each other," he said. "We haven't been us for a long time, and keeping things the way they are isn't fair to either of us." She looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no shock, only acceptance, the kind that comes from years of sensing something slipping away quietly. "I knew this was coming," she admitted gently. "I just didn't know when you would say it." Wilson sat across from her. "I care about you. I always will. But we can't keep holding on out of habit." Celeste exhaled slowly, her eyes softening. "I want both of us to find happiness again," she said. "Even if it's not together." There were no raised voices, no accusations, just two adults acknowledging a truth that hurt and healed at the same time. They agreed to separate peacefully, respectfully, and with dignity. No battles, no bitterness. And when Wilson walked out of that conversation, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Breath. Clear, unlabored breath. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a cage. A week later, Florence stood in front of the penthouse doors, with 2 suitcases at her side. The building's sleek lobby felt intimidating at first. Polished marble floors, modern lighting, and staff dressed sharper than some people at red carpet events. But the moment Wilson stepped out of the elevator and saw her, none of that mattered. "You made it," he said, unable to contain the smile forming across his face. Florence lifted an eyebrow. "You say that like I was running away." He laughed. "I don't think you run from anything." She gave him that warm, disarming smile, the one that made him forget about noise, expectations, obligations. He took her suitcases, leading her inside the elevator. As they entered the penthouse, Florence paused, taking in the sweeping view of Chicago through the massive windows. "I still can't get over this," she whispered. "Feels like living inside a postcard." Wilson chuckled. "It's better with you in it." She nudged him lightly. "Smooth." He laughed. "I'm trying." Florence walked deeper into the space. The penthouse that once felt cold to Wilson now seemed brighter, because she filled the room with presence alone. She set her purse down and spun around slowly. "So, this is home now?" "If you want it to be," he said. She stepped closer and kissed him softly. "I do." Their days began blending quickly into a rhythm that neither expected, but both welcomed. Florence filled the penthouse with pieces of herself, small framed photos of her family. In Memphis, scented candles, stacks of books, baskets of fruit she loved snacking on. Wilson was fascinated by her morning habits, the way she hummed softly while preparing tea, the journals she kept on the dining table, the occasional dance she broke into when she liked a song. Living with Florence didn't feel like sharing space. It felt like breathing again. But blending lives wasn't just romantic moments. It meant stepping into each other's social circles. Wilson introduced her to colleagues during a rooftop dinner one evening. The Chicago skyline stretched behind them as glasses clinked and servers placed dishes of grilled salmon and roasted vegetables on the table. Some guests were curious, politely curious, about Florence. Others were surprised. A few tried to hide that surprise and failed. But Florence handled every introduction gracefully. She laughed at jokes, asked thoughtful questions, and shared pieces of her background without trying to impress anyone. At one point, a woman leaned toward Wilson privately and whispered, "She's absolutely lovely. You seem lighter." Wilson didn't deny it. He felt lighter. Florence also brought Wilson into her world, a more vibrant, culturally rich environment brimming with flavor, warmth, and storytelling. She invited him to a Sunday cookout, hosted by her cousin on the South Side. The smell of seasoned chicken grilling in the backyard, the loud laughter from card games, the soulful playlist coming through the speakers. It was all new to Wilson, but he felt welcomed instantly. "Wilson," one of Florence's relatives called out, "you ever had real macaroni and cheese, not the boxed kind?" Florence laughed as Wilson raised his hands in surrender. "I'm willing to learn," he joked. The scene was lively, warm, full of the love Florence grew up with. Wilson watched her as she held a little cousin on her hip, laughing and telling stories, and something inside him felt settled, as if this environment fit her spirit so perfectly that he finally understood why Chicago alone wasn't enough to define Florence. It wasn't the city. It was the people, the culture, the history, the belonging. Later, as they drove home, Florence rested her hand on his thigh. "Thanks for coming today," she said quietly. "My family likes you. I like them too," he replied, smiling. She tilted her head slightly. "You handled the food teasing pretty well." "Barely survived," he teased. She laughed, and that laugh filled the car with warmth. For the first time in Wilson's adult life, he felt part of something bigger than his work or his social status. He felt part of a community, a real one, rich in connection and love. And Florence? She felt protected, valued, and understood. Their blended social lives became a reflection of their growing unity. They were different, yes, different histories, different cultures, different rhythms. But those differences didn't divide them. They colored their world. Each gathering, each outing, each shared meal stitched their new life together more tightly. One night, as they curled up on the couch watching a late-night comedy show, Wilson turned to Florence and said, "I feel like I'm finally living instead of just existing." She rested her head on his shoulder. "That's the point, Wilson. That's the whole point." He placed a soft kiss on her hair and whispered, "I'm grateful for you." Florence smiled. "You don't have to be grateful. Just be present." And he was, fully present. For the first time in years, Florence woke in the early hours of dawn with a strange heaviness in her body. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. She sat up gently, pressing a hand to her abdomen. For the past week, she had been more tired than usual. Her appetite had changed too. She craved odd combinations, like toast with peanut butter and watermelon at the same time. She chalked it up to stress, to adjusting to living with Wilson, to the emotional transformation their relationship had taken in such a short time. But this morning felt different. The room was quiet. Wilson was still asleep beside her, the soft rise and fall of his chest steady under the dim morning light. She watched him for a moment, appreciating his peaceful expression. He had been so attentive, supportive, and present, far more than she expected from a man who carried the weight of a high-profile career and a recent divorce. She slowly got out of bed, wrapped her robe around her, and headed to the bathroom. She stood before the mirror, looking at herself with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Then she took out the pregnancy test she had quietly purchased 2 days ago. Just in case, she had told herself, though she wasn't fully convinced. Now, as she waited for the result, her heart beat faster than she liked to admit. She leaned on the counter, rubbing her hands together slowly. 30 seconds passed, then 40, then a minute. The answer appeared. Positive. Florence blinked, then blinked again. A rush of warmth traveled through her body, but so did a wave of nerves. She set the test down and took a deep breath, holding her stomach. A quiet smile formed on her lips. She hadn't planned this, but she wasn't frightened. Life had taught her to embrace unexpected blessings with grace. Still, telling Wilson would be a moment requiring calm, patience, and the right timing. She stepped out of the bathroom and found him awake, sitting up against the pillows. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the look on her face. Florence stood there in the soft glow of morning, a woman who carried news that would change both of their lives. "I need to talk to you," she said gently. Wilson sat up straighter, concern touching his expression. "What's wrong?" She walked over, sat on the edge of the bed, and took his hand. "I'm pregnant." At first, Wilson didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. His mind froze entirely, as if time had paused just long enough for his heart to catch up. Finally, he whispered, "Pregnant?" Florence nodded slowly. "Yes. I found out this morning." Wilson exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. A dozen emotions crossed his face in seconds: shock, disbelief, wonder, joy, panic, excitement. "How far along do you think you are?" he asked. "Not far. Maybe a few weeks." He swallowed. "Florence, I don't even know what to say." She squeezed his hand. "Say what you feel." A long moment passed. Wilson looked at her with eyes so full of emotion she felt her own heart tug. "I'm happy," he said softly. "I'm scared." But I'm happy. Florence released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Me too. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness she hadn't expected so quickly. We'll figure everything out, he murmured. Whatever you need, whatever the baby needs, I'm here. She nodded into his shoulder, comforted by the sincerity in his voice. But neither of them had any idea how much more complex the news really was. 2 weeks later, they arrived at the ultrasound appointment. The clinic was bright and calming, decorated with motivational posters and soft pastel designs. A nurse led them to a small room, where Florence lay back on a reclined chair. Wilson sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. The doctor entered with a warm smile. Good morning. Ready to take a look? Florence smiled nervously. As ready as I'll ever be. Wilson squeezed her fingers. He was trying to look composed, but she could feel the tension in his grip. The doctor applied gel to Florence's stomach and placed the transducer gently on her skin. Within seconds, the soft flicker of life appeared on the screen. Florence's breath caught. Oh, wow. Wilson leaned forward, eyes wide. That's incredible. The doctor nodded. There's your baby. Florence felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. But then the doctor paused, narrowed her eyes slightly, and moved the transducer. Hold on, she muttered softly. Let me adjust. Wilson felt his stomach tighten. Is everything okay? The doctor didn't respond immediately. Instead, she scanned carefully across Florence's lower abdomen, her eyebrows lifting higher. Florence looked at her nervously. What is it? The doctor continued her scan, then finally turned to them with a mixed expression of surprise and amusement. Well, she said, it appears you're not expecting just one baby. Florence blinked. What? Wilson's heart dropped. What do you mean? The doctor pointed to the screen. There are 4. Silence. Absolute silence. Florence's mouth fell open. 4? That's correct. Quadruplets. Wilson's jaw dropped. His eyes darted from Florence to the screen and back. You're kidding. The doctor laughed kindly. I promise I'm not joking about something like this. Florence put a hand over her face. 4. Oh my goodness. Wilson started laughing, half hysterical, half astonished. 4. Florence. 4. She turned to him with disbelief. Wilson, I don't even know what to say. He wiped his forehead. Me neither. I think my soul just left my body and came back. Florence began laughing too, overwhelmed but somehow relieved to share the moment with him. Quadruplets, she whispered. The doctor went over the basics, high-risk category, frequent appointments, dietary needs, and the heavy likelihood of early bed rest. Florence listened carefully. Wilson scribbled notes on his phone like a man preparing for a doctoral exam. When the appointment ended, they walked to the parking lot in stunned silence. Halfway to the car, Wilson stopped walking, turned to Florence and blurted, Are we really having 4 babies? Florence burst out laughing so hard she doubled over. Yes, that's what she said. I thought maybe twins at most. But 4? His hands flew up. That's a whole team. Florence laughed again, brushing tears from her eyes. Wilson, breathe. We'll get through this. He placed his hands on her shoulders. I'm excited, completely terrified, but excited. So am I. They stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the revelations settle into their bones. A future bigger, louder, and more demanding than they'd ever imagined had just unfolded before them. The next few days were emotional whirlwinds. Wilson alternated between joy, panic, awe, and uncontrollable laughter. Florence experienced calm moments followed by waves of uncertainty, but every time Wilson rapped, his arms around her and whispered, We'll handle this together, she felt grounded. They discussed what life would look like now. Bigger home needs, extra medical appointments, financial planning, emotional readiness, support systems. Wilson made calls, scheduling meetings about maternity specialists, and purchasing books on raising multiples. Florence reached out to her mother in Memphis, who immediately prayed, celebrated, and joked. Girl, you always did things in 4s. Remember when you brought home 4 stray kittens in high school? Florence laughed. This is different, Ma. Her mother replied, Yes, honey. These ones won't fit in a shoebox. One evening, Florence sat on the couch rubbing her stomach. Wilson sat beside her, quietly observing. "Talk to me," he said gently. "I'm excited," she said honestly, "but also scared. 4 lives depend on me now. On us." He took her hand. "We'll rise to this. I promise." She searched his face and saw sincerity, conviction, responsibility, everything she needed in that moment. "You're going to be a great father," she whispered. He swallowed. "I want to be. More than anything." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for choosing to do this with me." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me." The room grew quiet, peaceful. 4 small heartbeats had already changed the rhythm of their lives forever. The weeks following the quadruplet revelation pulled Florence and Wilson into a new rhythm, one guided by appointments, careful routines, and cautious hope. Florence's body carried the weight of 4 growing lives, and every day reminded her that she wasn't just preparing for motherhood, she was preparing for a monumental journey. Their mornings began with soft sunlight spilling through the penthouse windows, Florence seated at the kitchen counter with a glass of water while Wilson hovered like a loving but anxious guardian. He read articles on prenatal vitamins, hydration schedules, and the proper sleeping positions for women carrying multiples. Florence teased him one morning, laughing softly as he held his phone inches from his face. "Wilson, I promise you don't need a medical degree for this." He looked up with wide, earnest eyes. "But you're carrying 4 babies, Florence. 4. I'd study architecture if it meant understanding how to keep everyone balanced in there." She shook her head playfully. "You're adorable. A little dramatic, but adorable." He set his phone down and kissed her cheek. "I just want you safe. All 5 of you." That sentence always hit her heart with warmth. He wasn't just preparing to be a father. He was embracing it, wholeheartedly. By the end of the 2nd trimester, Florence's doctor insisted on strict bed rest. Quadruplet pregnancies were delicate, and rest wasn't optional. Florence adjusted better than she expected, though she wasn't used to slowing down so dramatically. Wilson transformed their bedroom into a comfortable sanctuary. He moved a small bookshelf to her side of the bed, stocked it with her favorite novels, added a soft lamp, and placed a tray beside her for snacks. He even bought a small handheld fan, because she complained once about being too warm. But the most endearing addition was the whiteboard mounted near the dresser. Wilson wrote daily affirmations on it. "You're doing great, Florence. Our babies are strong because you are strong. I love you more every day." The messages weren't fancy, but their sincerity made her smile every morning. He made her breakfast, sometimes burned pancakes, sometimes acceptable oatmeal, and occasionally surprisingly good French toast. He brought her lunch on a tray, made sure she drank enough water, and rubbed her feet gently each evening when swelling set in. Yet it wasn't just physical care that made these days special. It was the emotional closeness building between them. Late at night, Florence would lie on her side, and Wilson would rest his hand over her belly. The babies kicked and rolled beneath his palm like a secret conversation happening under his touch. "Did you feel that?" he whispered one night, eyes wide with excitement. "Yes," Florence chuckled. "That's Aisha. She's been doing gymnastics in there all day." He grinned. "She gets that from you." Florence raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? And what exactly do you bring into the mix?" Wilson placed his other hand over his heart dramatically. "Unmatched emotional support. And occasional comic relief." She laughed, a sound that filled the room like music. Moments like these erased the fears, the uncertainties, the heaviness of carrying 4 developing lives. They were a reminder of what they were building together, not just a family, but a partnership anchored in love and care. As Florence settled deeper into bed rest, the news began spreading among their circles. Friends and relatives reacted with shock, joy, excitement, and a little disbelief. Her mother called nearly every day. "Baby, are you resting? You drinking enough? You letting that man take care of you?" Florence smiled softly into the phone. "Yes, Ma. He's actually doing too much sometimes." Her mother let out a knowing laugh. "A good man will do too much. It's the bare minimum ones you gotta worry about." Florence never argued with that. Surprisingly, Celeste reached out as well. One afternoon, while Florence was propped up against pillows reading a book, her phone buzzed. "Celeste, I heard the news. Congratulations. Please take care of yourself." Florence stared at the message for a long moment. It wasn't forced. It wasn't bitter. It was sincere. She replied gently, "Thank you, Celeste. That means a lot." Wilson didn't bring up his ex-wife often, but Florence respected that Celeste was part of his history. What mattered now was the grace they all showed moving forward. When Florence entered her 7th month, her relatives insisted on hosting a baby shower, one that reflected her heritage and everything she loved. Because she couldn't travel to Memphis, her family brought the celebration to Chicago. Wilson rented out a mid-sized event space just a short distance from the penthouse. It was decorated with warm earth tones, soft lighting, and a mix of Chicago and Memphis touches. Her mother oversaw every detail. Southern dishes prepared by family members who insisted on cooking rather than catering. Soul music playing softly in the background. Handmade quilts displayed as part of the decor. Florence arrived in a comfortable but elegant maternity dress. She was assisted into a reclining chair, positioned at the front of the room so everyone could greet her without causing too much strain. Her mother rushed up, hugging her carefully. "Look at you," she said, tearing up. "Carrying 4 miracles." Florence laughed softly, patting her stomach. "Trust me, Ma, they make their presence known." Her mother placed a hand over her belly. "That's nothing but blessings." The room filled slowly. Relatives, cousins, childhood friends, and even some of the friends she'd made in Chicago's fashion and art circles. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, a reflection of everything Florence cherished about family. Wilson stayed close, greeting everyone politely, offering drinks, and serving plates of food. The Memphis relatives kept commenting on him. "He's handsome. Look how he watches her. That's love right there. That man ain't letting her lift a finger." He took each comment with a shy smile, but Florence could see the pride in his eyes every time someone acknowledged his effort. Halfway through the event, her mother led a short prayer over Florence and the babies. Family members extended their hands, and the room became filled with quiet reverence. "Lord, thank you for these lives growing inside her. Thank you for the man standing beside her. Guide them, strengthen them, and let love fill their home." Florence wiped a tear before it fell. Wilson squeezed her hand gently. After the prayer, it was time for games and gifts. People laughed, cheered, and teased Wilson about his diaper-changing future. One of Florence's cousins held up 4 tiny onesies. "Wilson, you ready for all of this?" He raised his hands. "I don't know if anyone can be ready, but I'm willing to learn." Everyone burst into laughter. Then came the moment Florence didn't expect. Her mother tapped her fork against a glass. "I'd like to say something." The room quieted. She looked at Florence first, then Wilson. When Florence was born, she came into this world with a strong spirit. She has always carried love wherever she went. Now, she's about to carry 4 babies at once. 4. I don't know how she does it, but I do know this. She turned toward Wilson. "You're meant to walk beside her. I see how you care for her. I see how you cherish her, and I'm proud of both of you." Florence felt her heart swell. Wilson bowed his head in gratitude. The room erupted into applause. Later that evening, Florence rested back in the penthouse again, gently rubbing her belly. Wilson sat beside her on the bed, massaging her ankles gently. "Did you enjoy today?" he asked. "I loved it," she said. "Thank you for making it happen." He smiled. "Your family made it special. I just provided the space." She laughed softly. "You did more than that." He brushed his fingers across her leg. "You know, seeing everyone today, hearing your mother speak, it hit me." She looked at him curiously. "What did?" "How real this is," he said. "How close we are to meeting them." Florence placed her hand on his cheek. "We're going to be okay. We already are." He leaned forward, kissing her forehead. "You're incredible, Florence." She smiled, closing her eyes. The weight of pregnancy was heavy. The responsibility was enormous. But in that moment, wrapped in warmth, love, and support, Florence felt ready. Hours later, as she drifted to sleep, Wilson stayed awake a little longer, hand resting protectively on her belly. He whispered to the unborn children, "Hang in there, little ones. We can't wait to meet you." When Florence shifted slightly, he whispered to her too, "Thank you for letting me be part of this." The room was peaceful. The city lights flickered through the window. And for the first time in his life, Wilson understood what true purpose felt like. He wasn't living for status anymore. He was living for a family, a real one. A full, beautiful, unexpected one. The first weeks after the babies arrived were nothing short of beautiful chaos. The kind of chaos that softened the heart but strained the bones. The living room became a maze of baby swings, bottles, pacifiers, burp cloths, and tiny blankets. Every surface held something essential. Every hour held some unpredictable need. Florence shifted into motherhood with remarkable instinct. Even exhausted, she had a calming presence that soothed the babies. Wilson admired her deeply for it, the patience in her voice, the rhythm in her movements, the way she whispered to each child individually, as if they were her whole world. But admiration didn't erase reality. Raising one newborn was demanding. Raising 4 at once felt like living inside a constant alarm. Every 2 to 3 hours, someone cried. Sometimes 2. Sometimes all 4 at once. Sleep became fragmented, broken into thin slivers instead of hours. Meals were eaten in halves. Conversations were paused mid-sentence. Shower schedules depended entirely on which baby napped longest. One night, around 3 a.m., Florence sat on the couch holding Aisha, while Layla whimpered in the bassinet nearby. Wilson paced the room with Marcus pressed to his chest. Xavier was the only one asleep. Florence murmured, "Hand me Marcus. He needs burping." Wilson adjusted his hold. "I think I've tried every position." She smiled gently despite her tired eyes. "Let me try." He passed the baby over, and she began patting Marcus's back with practiced rhythm. Within seconds, a small burp escaped. Wilson exhaled. "How do you do that so easily?" Florence shrugged. "Maybe I'm just getting used to their patterns." He nodded, but something flickered across his face. Frustration mixed with a hint of inadequacy. Florence didn't notice. She was too busy trying to calm Layla's crying. Wilson stepped back, rubbing his face. His mind swirled with exhaustion and pressure. He had meetings piling up at work, investors expecting answers, and a board growing impatient with his frequent absences. He felt himself pulled in opposite directions, family on one side, career on the other, and both sides demanded more than he had. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into survival. Florence adjusted with quiet resilience, but Wilson began unraveling internally. He tried to hide it. He told himself, "This is supposed to be hard." He told himself, "I can handle this." He told himself, "I just need more time," but every day chipped away at him. One afternoon, while Florence napped with 2 of the babies curled beside her, Wilson stood in the kitchen staring at his phone. He had 12 missed emails, 3 requests for a virtual meeting, and a reminder about an upcoming pitch event for a major urban development project. Pressure tightened around his chest. He typed a reply to his assistant, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain why he couldn't show up the way he used to. He had wanted a family, desperately, but he hadn't expected to feel this. Overwhelmed. Florence woke up and shuffled into the kitchen, hair messy, exhaustion etched across her face yet still carrying a soft glow. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" He forced a smile. "Yeah. Just working." She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "You seem a little tense." "A little?" He snapped before he realized his tone. Her hand froze. Wilson closed his eyes immediately. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "No, it's okay," she whispered, stepping back slightly. "We're both tired." But his tone had pierced her, even if she tried to brush it off. Later that week, a new strain appeared. The babies had a rough day. Constant crying, refusing bottles, cluster feeding, fighting sleep. Florence handled most of it, while Wilson attended 2 back-to-back virtual meetings. When he finally stepped out, exhausted, he found Florence rocking Xavier with tears in her eyes. He rushed over. "What's wrong?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired. Really tired." He took Xavier from her arms. "You should rest." "I can't," she murmured. "The girls will wake up soon. I'll handle it." But she simply shook her head again. "It's okay, Wilson." He felt stung. "Do you not trust me with them or something?" She looked up, startled. "What? Of course I trust you." "Then let me take care of things," he said, voice sharper than intended. Florence felt the edge. "I never said you couldn't." Wilson closed his eyes, trying to steady himself. "I'm sorry. I just I feel like I'm messing everything up. Florence sighed softly. You're not messing anything up. You're just tired. We both are. Her voice was soothing, but Wilson didn't feel soothed. He felt defeated. Heavy, unsteady. As weeks passed, tension grew in quiet, subtle ways. Wilson spent more time in the office downstairs, claiming he needed to catch up on work. Florence spent more time alone with the babies, her days defined by feeding schedules and diaper changes. One evening, Florence tried to talk to him while folding laundry. Wilson, I feel like we haven't actually talked in days. He didn't look up from his laptop. I'm listening. No, you're not. He exhaled. Florence, what do you want me to do? We have 4 newborns. I'm doing everything I can. She paused, folding a tiny onesie. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, I miss you. Her honesty stunned him for a second, but instead of softening, something inside him tightened. Because he missed her too, desperately, but didn't know how to express the panic knotting inside him. Florence, I can't be everything at once, he said quietly, but with a frustrated edge. I'm stretched thin. Her eyes softened. I know, I see that. But I need you emotionally, not just physically here. He shut his laptop slowly. I'm trying. I know, she whispered. But the distance between them grew anyway. One night around midnight, the babies began crying one after another. The sound filled the penthouse like a storm. Florence rushed to Layla. Wilson hurried to Marcus. They moved through the room like 2 tired soldiers operating out of necessity. Florence bounced Layla on her hip and whispered soothing words. Wilson paced with Marcus, but his shoulders trembled with exhaustion. Florence called out softly, try switching the way you're holding him. He likes, I know, Wilson snapped, startling both her and the baby. The room froze. Marcus's crying paused, then resumed louder. Florence's eyes widened. Hey, don't yell. I wasn't yelling, he argued, voice rising anyway. Yes, you were, she said softly. We're both tired, but don't take it out on me. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm losing it, Florence. I'm losing it. She stepped toward him. You're just exhausted. No, he whispered, tears pressing behind his eyes. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the man you need and the father they need and still hold myself together. Florence watched him crumble internally, and her heart ached. She placed a hand on his cheek. Wilson, we're learning together. No one expects perfection. But, he shook his head. You're doing everything right. And I'm barely holding on. That's not true. But he felt it was. And feelings, when piled under pressure, became truths, even when they weren't real. Over the next month, the emotional distance thickened like fog. Wilson became quieter, less affectionate, more absent mentally, even when he was physically home. Florence tried to reach him gently, tried to support him, tried to remind him that they were partners, but every attempt slipped through the cracks of his overwhelmed mind. He wasn't cold. He wasn't cruel, but he was slowly slipping away from her, piece by piece. He didn't notice how often she cried in the shower. He didn't notice the loneliness in her eyes. He didn't notice the bruise forming on her heart each time he turned away emotionally. He didn't intend to hurt her, but pressure was transforming him into someone she barely recognized, and Florence could feel something coming, something heavy, something life-changing, something she wasn't ready for, but she could feel it anyway. Because pressure breaks what love built, even when the love was real. The shift wasn't sudden. It happened quietly, the way seasons change without anyone noticing the exact moment summer becomes fall. One day Wilson and Florence felt like a team, exhausted but united, and the next, something small broke inside the silence between them. Wilson's exhaustion deepened into detachment. His eyes became hollow, his smile forced, his presence fragile. He wasn't cruel. He was overwhelmed in a way he didn't know how to articulate. Meanwhile, Florence felt herself carrying not only the babies, but the emotional weight of the entire household. Day after day, the tension built between them like invisible dust settling in the corners of the penthouse. One early morning before the sun rose, Florence sat on the sofa feeding Xavier while the others slept in their bassinets. The living room was dim, lit only by a small lamp. She hummed gently as Xavier sucked rhythmically on the bottle. Wilson walked in wearing a wrinkled t-shirt, eyes heavy, shoulders slumped. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Without greeting her, he headed straight for the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared inside without grabbing anything. Florence said softly, "Good morning." He didn't respond immediately. He stood still, gripping the fridge door, breathing with difficulty. After a few seconds, he said, "Morning," but the word lacked life. Florence shifted Xavier in her arms. "Did you rest at all?" "A little," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. She knew that wasn't true. His body language betrayed him. He was drowning, not physically, but emotionally, mentally. She could see it in how he moved, how he sighed, how he avoided her eyes. Florence kept her tone gentle. "You should take a nap. I've got Xavier." "I can't," he said under his breath, closing the fridge. "I have a meeting I can't skip." "Wilson, you look exhausted." "I know," he replied, irritation slipping into his voice. She hesitated. "Let me help you." "I don't need help," he snapped suddenly. Florence blinked slowly. "I didn't say you were failing, Wilson. I'm just trying to support you." He inhaled sharply, then ran a hand through his messy hair. "I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep everything from falling apart." Florence swallowed her pain. "We're supposed to keep things together, not you alone." He didn't reply. Instead, he grabbed his laptop bag and left the room. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed through the penthouse. Xavier whimpered, sensing the tension. Florence gently rocked him, whispering, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." But inside, Florence felt a hollow ache starting to form, an ache that warned her something was changing. As weeks passed, Wilson grew more distant. He began spending longer hours at the office, sometimes returning home after midnight. Florence stopped asking when he would be back, because the answer became predictable. "I don't know." He never abandoned the babies. He changed diapers, helped with bottles, when he could, but there was a heaviness in his energy now. He performed tasks mechanically, without the warmth that once filled their home. Florence noticed it in little things. He no longer kissed her forehead in passing. He no longer asked how her day went. He no longer laughed at small jokes. He no longer reached for her hand. He wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there. One afternoon, Florence sat at the dining table folding tiny clothes when Wilson walked in. She looked up, hoping for conversation. "You're home early," she said with a warm smile. "Yeah," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Meeting got canceled." She studied him carefully. "Are you hungry? I can heat something up." "No, I'm fine." Florence exhaled softly. "Can we talk?" His jaw tightened. "About what?" "About us," she said, voice gentle but steady. He rubbed his forehead. "Florence, I don't have the energy for another discussion." "It's not another discussion," she replied. "We haven't had one in weeks." He didn't respond. Florence placed the folded onesie down and faced him. "I feel like I'm losing you, Wilson." His shoulders stiffened. "You're not losing me." She shook her head slowly. "You're not here. Not really." "I'm here every day," he shot back defensively. "Your body is here," she said quietly. "But your mind, your heart, they're somewhere else." He flinched as if the words physically struck him. Florence continued, voice trembling but honest. "I miss us. I miss the way we talked, the way we supported each other. Now it feels like you're walking around with a wall I can't reach over." Wilson looked away. "I'm trying, Florence. I'm trying to hold everything together. You don't have to hold everything alone." "Feels like I do." That sentence broke something inside her. Florence whispered, "You're shutting me out." He opened his mouth to respond, but the baby started crying in the bedroom. The sound interrupted the moment, dissolving the conversation like sand through fingers. Wilson walked away to tend to Marcus. Florence watched him go with a sinking heart. She didn't chase him. She didn't push further. She just felt the space between them expand wider. A few nights later, after all 4 babies finally fell asleep, Florence tried again. She sat beside Wilson on the couch. He stared at his computer screen, reviewing architectural sketches and investor notes. "Wilson," she said softly, "can you close your laptop for a minute?" He closed it slowly, but not willingly. "What's wrong?" "I want to feel close to you again," she admitted. "I want to feel like we're still in this together." He sighed heavily. "Florence, I'm barely functioning right now. I know, she whispered. But so am I. He frowned. You're handling everything fine. She shook her head. No. I'm struggling too. I just don't shut down. His eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing negative, she said carefully. I'm just saying, we need each other. We can't disconnect every time things get hard. He leaned back, exhaustion etched in every feature. I'm doing my best. Florence swallowed her tears. I know you are. But your best doesn't mean you have to disappear emotionally. His chest rose and fell sharply. I'm not disappearing. You are, she whispered. Piece by piece. The room fell silent. Wilson stood, rubbing his temples. I can't do this right now. Wilson, I said I can't. He walked into the office and closed the door gently, not slamming it, which somehow made it hurt more. Florence sat alone, feeling a pain she didn't know how to name. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't neglect. It was something quieter. The ache of watching someone she loved drown from the inside. Tension turned into distance. Distance turned into silence. And silence turned into emotional vacancy. The babies grew bigger. Their cries changed. Their faces became fuller. Their personalities began to peek through in small expressions. But Wilson didn't notice those milestones as much anymore. He was there physically, but emotionally. He was a ghost of himself. Florence noticed everything. How he avoided eye contact. How he brushed past her gently, but without touch. How he sighed when she asked simple questions. How he left early and returned late. How he seemed relieved when the babies slept, but not joyful when they were awake. One evening, as Florence rocked Layla, she heard Wilson on a call in the next room. His voice was firmer, more alive than it had been with her. Yes, I can meet tomorrow, he said. Yeah, I need a change of direction anyway. No, I'm not fine, but I'm trying. Florence froze. He wasn't fine, and he wasn't trying with her. When he exited the room, she asked softly, You okay? Yeah, he said quickly. Just work. I need to lie down. He walked away without kissing the babies goodnight. Florence's heart cracked quietly, the kind of quiet that breaks most deeply. One cold evening, after a long day, Florence found Wilson standing by the window staring out over the city. His shoulders were tight, his eyes unfocused. She approached gently. Wilson, talk to me, please. He didn't turn around. There's nothing to talk about. That's not true. He exhaled. I feel trapped, Florence. Her breath caught. Trapped? Not by you, he said quickly. Not by the babies, just by everything. She stepped closer. Let me carry some of it with you. You already carry enough. That doesn't mean I can't hold you too. He closed his eyes. Florence reached for his hand. I love you, Wilson. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze her hand back. That was the first time she truly feared losing him. Quiet arguments replaced affection. Short replies replaced conversations. Distance replaced intimacy. But the worst part? Wilson didn't seem to notice the emotional erosion. Florence did. Every minute. The moments that once tied them together now unraveled silently. Florence kissed him goodnight. He barely responded. Florence asked how work went. He gave one-word answers. Florence said she missed him. He changed the subject. She didn't want to burden him. She didn't want to guilt him. She didn't want to beg him. She wanted him to want to come back emotionally, but he didn't. Florence cried quietly one evening, sitting in the bathroom with the door closed, covering her mouth to muffle the sound so she wouldn't wake the babies. She pressed her forehead to her knees and whispered, Please come back to me. Please. But love, when strained too far, begins to break at the seams. And in that penthouse, the same one where joy once bloomed, something fragile was ripping slowly apart. Florence didn't know that the breaking point was already coming. She didn't know that Wilson, in his confusion and emotional collapse, would soon make a decision that would shatter everything she believed about him. A decision she never saw coming. Florence didn't notice the exact moment Wilson slipped beyond her reach. If she had to guess, it wasn't one moment. It was many small ones. Moments where he looked past her instead of at her. Moments where he nodded instead of responded. Moments where he was present in the room, but absent in spirit. But the day that changed everything came quietly, wrapped in normalcy. It began on a Thursday afternoon. Florence sat on the floor surrounded by toys, sorting them while the babies played on a soft mat nearby. Aisha babbled happily, smacking a plush giraffe. Xavier gnawed on a teething ring. Layla followed Florence's movements with curious eyes, while Marcus giggled at his siblings. Florence smiled softly. This, despite the fatigue, was the joy she clung to. The penthouse door clicked open. "Wilson?" she called, surprised. He wasn't supposed to be home for another 3 hours. "Yes," he answered, but his voice carried no warmth. He stepped into the room, loosening his tie. His eyes darted to the babies briefly, then away, as though even their joy added pressure to his already heavy chest. Florence rose slowly. "You're home early. Everything okay?" He nodded stiffly. "Work was a lot." She approached gently. "Do you want to sit with us? They've been in a great mood." He hesitated, just for a second, before answering, "Maybe later." "I need to rest." He walked into the bedroom and closed the door softly. Not slammed, softly. That softness cut deeper. Florence watched the closed door, feeling a coldness spread through her chest. Something was coming. Something she could feel, but not yet name. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that while she held their family together, Wilson was unraveling in a way that made him vulnerable to the worst influence at the worst time. The company hosting his upcoming project proposal had recently hired a young public relations consultant, Marisol. She was polished, ambitious, attentive, and she knew exactly how to listen to a man who felt invisible at home. When Wilson spoke about pressure, she leaned in. When he mentioned exhaustion, she sympathized. When he hinted at feeling trapped, she called it normal for a man with his responsibilities. She didn't challenge him. She didn't question him. She didn't ask him to be better. She only made him feel understood, even if what she understood was his weakest self. To Wilson, who was drowning, that false sense of ease felt like relief. So when she suggested they partner on the pitch presentation, he agreed. And when she invited him to dinner afterward to finalize details, he didn't say no. Not because he didn't love Florence, not because he didn't care about their family, but because pressure had reshaped his judgment, because exhaustion made foolish choices feel reasonable, because emotional distance clouded the clarity he once had. Dinner led to more conversations. More conversations led to fragile emotional dependence. And fragile emotional dependence led to something reckless, something he didn't think through, something he would regret later. He didn't tell Florence. He couldn't, because some truths were too shameful to speak, even to the woman he once held as his lifeline. 2 weeks later, Florence discovered the invitations. It happened on a quiet morning. She was sorting through the mail, sitting inside a delivery package at the door. Bills, magazines, a flyer, and then one thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold. She opened it casually. Her breath stopped. The invitation read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the marriage of Wilson and Marisol at the Preston Hotel Ballroom, Chicago." Florence's hands began trembling so violently, the envelope nearly slipped from her fingers. She read the names again, and again, and again. The room dimmed. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She tasted metal in her mouth, the shock so intense she couldn't even cry. "No," she whispered, blinking hard. "No, this isn't real." But the paper in her hands was real. The letters were real. The betrayal was real. She felt her knees buckle and dropped into a chair, gripping the invitation in shaking hands. A distant cry from Xavier reached her ears, but she couldn't move. It felt as though the world had cracked under her feet. "Wilson," she whispered brokenly. "What did you do?" The door to the bedroom opened. He stepped out, stretching his arms casually, until he saw her face. "Florence?" he asked, confused. "What's wrong?" She held up the invitation silently. Wilson froze. His eyes widened. His chest tightened. His throat constricted. Everything in him collapsed inward. Where did you get that?" he whispered. "It came in the mail," Florence said, in a voice so soft, so shattered, it didn't sound like her own. She rose slowly, trembling. "Tell me what this is." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "It's not what you think." Florence let out a strangled sound. Then what is it, Wilson? Because this says you're marrying someone else. He stepped forward. I never meant for you to find out like this. She stumbled back as if he'd struck her. You were going to marry someone else, and not tell me? Wilson ran a shaking hand through his hair. Florence, I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. Everything was falling apart and… So you thought the solution was another woman? She cried. He flinched. I didn't plan it, he said desperately. It just happened. Nothing just happens, she said through clenched teeth. You make choices. You chose her. No, he pleaded. I chose escape. I chose the easiest way out because I was drowning. I didn't choose her over you. That's still choosing her, Florence whispered. Silence crashed between them like a wave. Florence pressed her palm to her forehead, tears spilling freely. You left me holding this entire family while you collapsed into someone else's arms. I was overwhelmed. So was I, she snapped. But I didn't betray you. He closed his eyes in pain. Florence's voice broke into pieces. You promised we'd face everything together. You promised I wasn't alone. Wilson lowered his head. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But apologies couldn't stitch together a heart ripped open. Florence stepped away, clutching the chair for balance. I gave you everything, Wilson, every part of me, and you chose to give your commitment to someone else. He reached for her. She stepped back. Don't, she whispered. Don't touch me. Her tears weren't loud. They were quiet, the kind that carried deeper pain. Later that afternoon, Florence left the penthouse and walked to a small cafe nearby. She called only 2 people, Celeste and Kwame, her cousin who lived nearby and had always been her sounding board. Kwame arrived first, sliding into the booth across from her. His eyes softened instantly when he saw her swollen face. Sis, what happened? He asked gently. Florence handed him the invitation with trembling fingers. He read it. His jaw clenched. That man. She shook her head weakly. I don't know what to feel. I don't even know who he is anymore. You know who he was, Kwame said softly. Not who he became under pressure. Minutes later, Celeste arrived. Florence braced herself, unsure whether Celeste would judge or take sides. But Celeste didn't say a word. She simply slid into the seat beside Florence and pulled her into a gentle embrace. Florence collapsed against her shoulder, sobbing silently. Celeste whispered, You didn't deserve this. Not after everything you carried. Florence wiped her eyes. Did you know? Celeste shook her head firmly. No. And if I had, I would have confronted him myself. He was drifting, but I didn't know he went this far. Kwame placed a hand on Florence's arm. What are you going to do? Florence inhaled shakily, looking at the invitation again, the symbol of betrayal, of cowardice, of heartbreak. But something inside her steadied. I'm not going to fight him, she whispered. I'm not going to chase him, and I'm not going to fall apart where he can see it. Kwame and Celeste exchanged glances. Florence sat up straighter, wiping her tears. I'm going to walk into the truth with dignity, she said quietly. I owe that to myself, and to my children. Celeste nodded with deep respect. You always were stronger than the rest of us. Florence folded the invitation and slid it into her purse. She wasn't done. She wasn't defeated. She hadn't lost herself, only him. Now she would face the reality he created. On her terms. The morning of Wilson's wedding arrived with a stillness that didn't match the occasion. Chicago's skyline glowed under a pale dawn, but inside the suite of the Preston Hotel, the atmosphere was tight, heavy, and fragile. Wilson sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring blankly at the neatly pressed suit hanging near the window. A tailored charcoal jacket, crisp white shirt, polished shoes, everything chosen to project confidence and celebration, but nothing inside him felt celebratory. His hands clasped and unclasped in his lap. His jaw tightened repeatedly. His heartbeat thudded in an uneven rhythm, each beat echoing the mistake he was about to make. His reflection in the mirror looked older, tired, and unlike the man he once believed himself to be. There was no joy in his eyes, no anticipation, only guilt, thick and suffocating. A knock on the door broke the silence. Come in, he said. Marisol entered, wearing a silk robe, her hair pinned in large rollers. She looked excited, radiant even. But when she saw Wilson's expression, her smile faltered slightly. "You okay?" she asked, approaching slowly. He forced a smile he didn't feel. "Yeah. Just a big day. You're nervous," she chuckled lightly, sitting beside him. "Most grooms are." He nodded but didn't speak. She rested her hand on his arm. "I know things got complicated with your past, but today is a fresh start." Fresh start. Those words stung. Florence's face flashed in his mind. Her tears, her trembling voice, her heartbreak as she held the invitation he never intended for her to see. Then, even worse, the babies, Xavier's calm eyes, Aisha's spirited kicks, Layla's soft coos, Marcus's bright laughter. His chest tightened painfully. He still hadn't forgiven himself. "Wilson?" Marisol pressed gently. "Talk to me." He cleared his throat. "It's nothing," but it wasn't nothing. The guilt was carving him open from the inside. Marisol smiled again, lighter this time, unaware of the tornado behind his eyes. "Well, the ceremony starts in 4 hours. Try to breathe, okay?" She kissed his cheek and returned to her suite, humming softly, unaware. She was marrying a man whose heart was somewhere else entirely. The moment she left, Wilson dropped his head into his hands. "What am I doing?" he whispered. The weight of his choices pressed so heavily on him that he struggled to inhale. He knew he was running. He knew he was trying to escape the pain of failing as a father, drowning as a partner, and collapsing as a man under pressure. He knew this marriage wasn't love. It was avoidance, disguised as a new beginning, and the person paying the highest price for his mistakes was Florence. Across the city, in a small, quiet apartment Florence had rented temporarily, the morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft brightness over the room. Florence stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the royal blue dress she had chosen for. Today, not because she wanted to be beautiful, but because she wanted to walk in with dignity. The fabric hugged her waist gently, flowing gracefully down her figure. Her hair was styled into soft curls, framing her face. Her makeup was warm, elegant, and subtle, enough to hide the swelling around her eyes from nights of crying. But behind the tiredness, there was strength. A kind of strength that doesn't shout, it steadies. On the bed behind her were 4 tiny outfits laid side by side. A soft gray romper for Xavier. A cream one-piece with tiny buttons for Marcus. A blush pink dress for Layla. A sky blue dress for Aisha. She dressed each child carefully, speaking to them softly as she did. "Mommy loves you," she whispered to Layla as she tied a tiny bow. "You're my joy," she told Xavier, kissing his cheek. "You're my brave boy," she told Marcus, brushing a curl from his forehead. "And you," she told Aisha, "you're fierce like your mama." The babies cooed, unaware of the gravity of the day. Once they were all dressed, she placed them in the stroller designed for quadruplets, something she'd purchased gently from a second-hand boutique weeks before. She stepped back and looked at her family. Her heart swelled and cracked at the same time. Today was not about revenge, nor was it about causing public humiliation. It was about truth, walking into the very place someone erased her and leaving footprints they could never forget. Florence took a deep breath. "This is the day we walk with courage," she whispered, lifting her chin. "Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve the truth." She grabbed her purse, adjusted her shawl, and gently pushed the stroller toward the door. Her hands trembled, but her resolve did not. Back at the Preston, Wilson tried tying his tie for the 4th time, but his fingers shook too much. He stared at his reflection again, studying the hollowness in his eyes. He whispered the question he didn't dare say aloud. Would Florence ever forgive him? Did he even deserve forgiveness? He gripped the edge of the sink to steady himself. Images ran through his mind in rapid flashes. The first time Florence fell asleep in his arms. The day they found out about the quadruplets. The moment Marcus wrapped his tiny hand around his finger. Florence whispering, "We're in this together," even when he felt unworthy of her faith. His chest tightened violently. He wasn't marrying Marisol because he loved her. He was marrying her because he believed he had already destroyed everything that mattered. Cowards didn't run away from pain. Cowards ran into decisions that avoided responsibility. And today, he was the biggest coward of all. A knock came at the door. "Wilson, you ready?" A hotel staff member called. He inhaled slowly. "Yeah, I'm coming," but he didn't move. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff with no wings. Florence arrived at the hotel entrance with the quadruplet stroller, and her heart pounding like thunder beneath her ribs. The lobby was bustling, guests arriving in elegant gowns and tuxedos, florists carrying arrangements, staff rushing with trays and champagne bottles. But when Florence stepped through the doors, people noticed. Her royal blue dress caught the light. Her curls framed her face like a crown. Her posture was regal, grounded, unshaken. But what captured an entire room wasn't just her beauty. It was the 4 babies she pushed before her. 4 beautiful faces, all recognizable. 4 sets of features unmistakably tied to Wilson. Guests whispered, "Is that those kids? She looks familiar. Wait, is that Wilson's? Oh my goodness." Florence kept her eyes forward, her breath steady, her expression calm. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She was here to reveal a truth. Wilson had spent months burying under guilt, shame, and fear. And she was here for her children, the ones who deserved to be seen, acknowledged, accepted. As she reached the center of the lobby, conversations died down entirely. Silence spread like a slow wave. Heads turned, mouths dropped, hearts pounded. But Florence stood tall. Her arrival alone disrupted the illusion of a perfect wedding day, and she hadn't even stepped into the ballroom yet. Upstairs, Wilson stood near the entrance of the ceremony hall, trying to breathe through the chaos inside his chest. His mother's voice echoed lightly, "Guests are arriving, everything is beautiful," but he didn't hear her. His pulse throbbed in his temples. His palms were sweaty. His heart, full of guilt, felt impossibly heavy. He was about to walk down an aisle toward a woman he didn't love, while the woman he did love was somewhere in the city, raising 4 children he was too ashamed to claim publicly. Wilson took a shaky breath. I wish I had been stronger," he whispered. He didn't know that strength was already walking through the lobby below, and she was bringing the truth with her. The Preston Hotel ballroom shimmered in warm candlelight. Rows of guests, dressed in rich fabrics, filled the seats, whispering among themselves about the upcoming ceremony. A towering floral arch, draped in white petals and soft gold fabric, framed the altar where Wilson would soon stand. Music drifted through the room, slow, elegant, and completely at odds with the storm building just outside the ballroom doors. Inside, Marisol paced nervously with her bouquet, adjusting her veil every few seconds. Her bridesmaids whispered encouragement, unaware that fate was seconds away from unraveling every detail they planned. Meanwhile, in the lobby below, Florence stood with her hand on the quadruplet stroller, gathering every ounce of courage she had. She inhaled deeply. "This isn't for revenge," she whispered to the babies. "It's for truth. For you. Always for you." The babies stirred, not crying, not fussing, almost as if they sensed the moment. Florence pushed the stroller forward. With each step, the room continued to hush. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Eyes widened. Hands covered mouths. Florence kept her chin lifted, shoulders steady, heart pounding in a rhythm that screamed both pain and resolve. She approached the double doors leading into the grand ballroom. 2 staff members stood there, confused by the attention she had drawn. "Ma'am, are you looking for a guest?" one asked politely. Florence met his eyes, calm, poised, unshaken. "No," she said, softly. "I'm looking for the groom." The staff member froze. Then, almost instinctively, he pushed open the ballroom doors. A sweeping hush fell over the entire space as Florence stepped inside. It was as if the air itself was pulled out of the room. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her. The woman who had once been the quiet, loving partner in Wilson's life. The mother of his 4 beautiful children. The woman he left behind in the darkest moment of their relationship, now stood dressed in royal blue, radiant yet wounded, pushing a stroller carrying undeniable truth. Gasps erupted. Soft, sharp, shocked. "Oh my. That's Florence. Are those? They look exactly like. No way." The string quartet faltered and stopped playing entirely. Marisol stared, frozen, bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. Even from the far side of the room, the resemblance between Wilson and the babies was unmistakable. The same chin shape, the same bright eyes, the same soft curls. Florence walked at a steady pace, each step echoing through the stunned silence. Never hurried, never hesitant, never ashamed. She moved like a woman who remembered who she was and who her children deserved her to be. When she reached the center aisle, she paused. The moment stretched like an eternity. Up at the altar, Wilson felt the shift before he even saw her. Something in the room changed. Something in the air broke open. He looked up. His heart stopped. Florence, the mother of his children. The woman he once kissed in the rain. The woman he betrayed in his weakest hour. She stood framed by the tall doors, glowing in blue, surrounded by murmurs and the sound of the quadruplets cooing softly. His chest tightened painfully. "Florence," he whispered, breath hitching. His legs moved before his mind caught up. He stepped away from the altar, stumbling slightly as he struggled to comprehend the sight before him. The guests watched with bated breath as he descended the steps and walked toward her, slow, hesitant, awe-stricken. When he reached speaking distance, the world around them blurred. "Florence," he breathed again, voice cracking. "You came." She met his eyes, her expression unreadable, strong yet tender, hurt yet composed. "I didn't come for you," she said softly. Her voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't vindictive. It simply spoke truth. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she murmured. "They said it for you." She tilted her head toward the babies, their babies, whose eyes looked up curiously at the man who abandoned them without understanding why. Wilson's breath left him in a painful gasp. Layla blinked up at him with the same calm Wilson carried in his childhood photos. Xavier tilted his head just like Wilson did when he was curious. Aisha kicked softly, her expression fierce like Florence. Marcus smiled, that same bright, wide smile Wilson had seen in the mirror for years. Wilson covered his mouth, overwhelmed. "Oh God," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." But before he could say anything more, Marcus spotted him. His little face lit up instantly. He stretched his arms toward Wilson and squealed, voice echoing through the ballroom. "Daddy!" The word burst into the air like lightning. Gasps erupted everywhere. Several guests stood from their seats. Some covered their hearts. Others whispered frantically. Marisol stepped backward, color draining from her face. Wilson fell to his knees in front of the stroller. Tears streamed down his face as Marcus leaned forward, reaching for him again. "Dada," Marcus repeated joyfully. It broke him. Wilson lifted Marcus gently from the stroller, holding him against his chest. Marcus giggled, tapping his father's cheek with tiny fingers. Wilson sobbed. Real, uncontrolled, regret-filled sobs. He touched Marcus's curls, his little hands, his round cheeks. He whispered over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Florence looked away briefly, unable to witness the intensity of the moment without feeling the sting of betrayal all over again. When Wilson finally looked up at her, his face was red, tears streaming, voice trembling. "You brought them," he whispered. "They deserve to be seen," she said calmly. He nodded slowly, still holding Marcus tightly. At that moment, Xavier began fussing. Wilson reached instinctively, placing Marcus back and lifting Xavier instead. Then Layla. Then Aisha. His hands shook as he touched each child, as though he was trying to memorize them all over again. The guests watched in complete silence, moved beyond words. Even those who judged Florence moments earlier now softened, seeing the truth with their own eyes. Marisol stepped forward finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Wilson, what is happening?" He turned slowly. His voice cracked. I made a mistake." Florence looked down at the stroller. She wasn't here to embarrass anyone, but the truth flowing through the room couldn't be undone. Marisol's eyes filled, not with anger, but with resignation. She stepped back, her voice small but honest. "You were never mine." Wilson didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He simply lowered his head. Florence felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, heaviness, tenderness, and a distant spark of relief. Not for herself, but for her children, who deserved clarity. The room remained silent, still suspended in the shock. Florence whispered to the babies, "All right, loves, let's breathe. Mommy's right here." Wilson looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time in years. Strength, grace, motherhood, love, dignity. He felt unworthy of all of it. Finally, he whispered, "Florence, please don't leave, not like this." But Florence's eyes, filled with strength, said she wasn't running. She had already walked into this moment with courage. She would walk out the same way. The ceremony had not just paused, it had ended, but something else had begun, a confrontation of truth that could no longer be avoided. And Florence, dressed in royal blue, surrounded by her 4 children, had turned an entire ballroom into a witness to the consequences of one man's choices. The next words she spoke would shape everything that came after. The ballroom remained frozen, not a cough, not a shuffle, not a whisper lingering in the air. Only the soft gurgling of the babies and the pounding of broken hearts filled the silence. Florence rose slowly from beside the stroller, her royal blue dress brushing against the marble floor. Her eyes lifted to meet Wilson's, eyes filled with both history and hurt, both strength and tenderness. He stood trembling, one hand resting on Aisha's tiny back, the other clutching the edge of the stroller for balance. Marcus still reached for him with excited joy, unaware of the weight his small voice had carried moments earlier. Florence inhaled deeply. She hadn't come to destroy a wedding. She hadn't come to humiliate anyone. She came because truth deserved a place in the room where lies were about to be sealed with vows. She took one step forward. The crowd parted instinctively, giving her space, not out of fear, but out of respect. Florence glanced at the quadruplets, then at Wilson. When she spoke, her voice carried warmth, steadiness, and pain wrapped in dignity. "I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because silence would have been the real cruelty." A soft gasp rippled through the room. She continued, "These children didn't ask for any of this. They didn't ask to be hidden. They didn't ask to be raised without acknowledgement. They didn't ask for their father to run away from them, or from me." Wilson's face twisted with agony. Florence looked down briefly, gathering strength. When she lifted her head again, her voice carried deeper conviction. "I loved you, Wilson. I loved you through pressure, through exhaustion, through fear. I carried these babies while carrying your absence. I held us together while you drifted. I waited for you to return, not as a perfect man, but as the man you once promised to be." Tears streamed down Wilson's face. Florence pressed a hand over her heart. "You weren't replaced. You walked away." The truth hit the room like a soft but unyielding blow. Florence stepped toward the stroller and gently brushed Xavier's cheek. "But these children, they are not mistakes. They are not secrets. They are blessings. They are your blood. And they came here today because they deserve to be claimed." Wilson's knees buckled slightly, as if the force of her words was too much to bear. Marisol stood frozen near the altar, bouquet in hand, watching a truth she never expected to witness. She had known something was off, Wilson's detachment, his sadness, the hollow way. He accepted their engagement, but she never knew the depth of what he ran from. Florence turned to her next, offering something no one expected. "Marisol, this moment isn't your fault." A murmur traveled through the guests. Marisol swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "I believe you," Florence replied gently. "And I don't blame you. Love doesn't break people. Pressure does, and Wilson was under more pressure than he could bear." Marisol blinked rapidly, her emotions trembling in her eyes. Florence continued, voice steady but soft. "You deserve a man who walks toward you, not one who's running from his past." At those words, Marisol closed her eyes. She placed the bouquet on the altar, stepped forward, and faced Wilson. Her voice was calm. "You can't marry me, not when your heart is somewhere else." Wilson looked at her helplessly. "Marisol, I'm sorry." She shook her head gently. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to her, and to them." She nodded toward the quadruplets. Then, with grace few brides could ever summon in such a moment, she stepped aside. The entire ballroom felt the shift, a collapsing of the ceremony, a rising of truth, a recognition of pain, and the beginning of something that could be healed or destroyed, depending on the next words spoken. Florence exhaled deeply and turned back to Wilson. He stared at her with a wounded expression, one stitched with guilt, regret, longing, and fear. He took a shaky step toward her, then another, until he stood directly in front of her, trembling from head to toe. He tried to speak, but no words formed. His throat tightened. His chest jerked with half-formed sobs. Finally, he broke. "Florence, I failed you." She stood still, letting him say the words she deserved to hear. "I failed our family. I lost myself. I ran instead of fighting. I hid instead of healing. I hurt you, the last person in this world I ever wanted to hurt." His voice cracked again. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to be the man you and the babies needed. I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't brave enough." Tears streamed freely now. "I've regretted it every single day." Florence closed her eyes, absorbing the pain and honesty in each word. When she opened them again, Wilson continued, voice trembling. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. But I'm begging. I'm begging for a chance to try again, to show up, to be better, to be a father, to be the man I should have been from the beginning." His knees wavered, and before anyone could react, he dropped to the floor. In front of her, not out of theatrics, but out of emotional collapse, he lowered his head and whispered, "Please, don't let this be the end of us." The room held its breath. Even the babies quieted, as if sensing the fragile moment. Florence looked down at him. This man she loved, this man who broke her, this man who was now broken before her. She knelt too, not completely, but enough to meet his eyes. Her voice softened. "Wilson, look at me." He lifted his gaze. Florence reached up, wiping one of his tears gently. "Before I answer you, I need the people watching this video to do something for me." She turned briefly toward the imagined audience, toward your viewers. "Please take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful life lessons." Then she turned back to Wilson. Her tone deepened with sincerity. "Forgiveness isn't a gift you ask for, it's something you earn. And healing isn't a promise, it's a process. A long one that requires honesty, consistency, humility, and change." Wilson nodded rapidly, hopeful tears rushing down. "I'll do anything," he whispered. Florence held his face in both hands. "You can't erase what happened. You can't undo the pain, but you can choose to build something stronger, not out of guilt, but out of love and accountability." He breathed out shakily. "I want that," she whispered. "Then yes, Wilson, I'm willing to try again." Gasps swept through the ballroom, but these were soft, relieved, touched by grace. Wilson broke into sobs again, pulling her close with caution, afraid to overwhelm her. Florence leaned into him, resting her forehead against his. The ballroom felt warm now, filled with emotion, overflowing with humanity. Behind them, the babies began cooing. Marcus reached toward Wilson again. Aisha kicked her little foot. Layla blinked up at the lights. Xavier made a soft, content sound. Wilson stood, lifting Florence gently with him. He walked to the stroller and placed a hand over all 4 children at once. "From this moment forward, I'm present. I'm yours. I'm theirs." Florence placed her hand over his. And together, surrounded by witnesses who expected a perfect wedding, but instead received a perfect truth, they stood as a family finally reclaiming its place. The ceremony did not end with vows. It ended with something rarer: redemption, accountability, grace, and a love rebuilt, not imagined. The ballroom that once held its breath in shock now softened beneath the glow of reconciliation. The floral arch still stood at the altar, untouched. The seats remained filled, but the room felt entirely transformed, as if truth itself had rewritten the energy in the space. Where shame once lingered, warmth began quietly returning. Florence stood beside the stroller, steady and composed. The quadruplets babbled happily, unaware of the history they had just changed. The weight in the room shifted from disbelief to tenderness, as guests witnessed not a scandal, but a family being restored. Wilson wiped his face again, breathing deeply as he tried to steady himself. His emotions trembled between relief, humility, and the sharp sting of regret. But for the first time in months, he also felt something he thought he had lost: hope. Florence looked at him with calm eyes, not mocking him, not belittling him, not shaming him. She looked at him like a woman who remembered the good in a man, even when he forgot it himself. Something about her silence gave him permission to try again. Behind them, the officiant, who had stood frozen through the entire moment, slowly lowered his book and cleared his throat. "Would you like me to pause the ceremony?" he asked timidly. Florence turned toward him. "There is no ceremony anymore. Not that one, at least." A few guests chuckled awkwardly, but Florence wasn't joking. She stepped forward slightly. "There can't be a wedding built on confusion," she said softly. "But there can be a celebration built on truth." Wilson blinked, surprised by her grace. She looked at him. "This is your family, Wilson. These children, this truth, this is where you begin again." He swallowed, trembling. "Florence, I don't deserve to stand beside you." She didn't deny it. She didn't soften it. But she also didn't use it to punish him. "You don't have to deserve grace to receive it," she whispered. "You just have to honor it from now on." The crowd murmured, touched, moved, humbled. Wilson's mother pushed through the crowd, tears flooding down her cheeks. She rushed toward Florence. "My goodness," she whispered, hands trembling as she looked at the quadruplets. "They're beautiful." Florence smiled politely. "Thank you." Wilson's mother placed a hand over her mouth as she leaned closer to Marcus. "He has Wilson's smile," she whispered. "And Xavier, he looks like my father." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't know," she whispered to Florence. "I didn't know about any of this." Florence nodded gently. "I know. None of this is your fault." Wilson's mother turned toward her son with a look of relief mixed with heartbreak. "You're a father," she whispered. "A father of 4. And you almost missed all of this." Wilson looked down, unable to speak. She cupped his cheek firmly. "Don't waste another second." Her blessing, quiet, powerful, shifted the room once again. One of the elderly guests stood suddenly, clapping slowly. The sound echoed. Another joined, then another, and another, until the entire ballroom filled with applause, not for drama, but for courage. Florence felt tears gather in her eyes, not from hurt, but from the overwhelming realization that she had walked into this room carrying truth, and was walking out carrying far more support than she expected. Wilson stepped closer to her, his voice shaking. "Florence, may I hold your hand?" She hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of the seriousness of the moment. Then she extended her hand. Wilson took it carefully, reverently, as though holding something fragile and sacred. He looked at her with a trembling smile. "Thank you." She nodded. "Don't thank me yet." A hotel staff member approached timidly. "Miss Florence, the band is asking whether they should stop playing or continue." Florence turned to the band, musicians who looked just as unsure as everyone else. She surprised them with a gentle smile. "Play something soft," she said. "Something warm, something real." The band nodded gratefully. Moments later, soft jazz filled the ballroom, smooth, calming, giving the room the atmosphere of an evening gathering rather than a formal event. Guests relaxed into their seats. Some wiped their tears. Some whispered prayers. Some smiled at the quadruplets who had begun waving their tiny arms as if enjoying the attention. The shift was complete. The wedding wasn't ending. It was being reborn. Wilson approached the stroller again, kneeling beside it. He touched each child gently, memorizing every detail. "Aisha, you're so big now," he whispered. "Layla, look at you," he said softly, brushing a curl away. "Xavier, strong little man." And then he scooped Marcus up again, lifting him carefully. Marcus squealed with joy and grabbed Wilson's nose. The ballroom laughed, every adult touched by the innocence of a child who saw no flaw in the father who failed him, only love. The laughter softened Wilson's heart even more. Florence watched him quietly. This was the man she fell in love with, not perfect, but capable of deep love. Not flawless, but capable of growth. Not always steady, but always willing to try again. A small group of guests approached Florence one by one. An older woman said, "You handled this with dignity. Many adults don't have." A middle-aged man added, "You didn't embarrass him. You revealed the truth. That's strength." A younger woman whispered, "Those babies are blessed to have you." Florence thanked each person warmly, her grace elevating the moment. beyond scandal into the kind of story that would linger for years. Eventually, the officiant approached Florence again, hands clasped. "Do you wish to say anything else to the room?" Florence shook her head. "No. The truth speaks for itself." He nodded respectfully. Wilson then turned to her, voice soft and vulnerable. "Florence, this room was decorated for a wedding I shouldn't have been part of." He paused, trembling. "But if you ever allow it, one day, I want this room, or any room, to be filled for us." Florence's breath caught. "Not today," she whispered. "I know," he replied immediately. "Not today, not soon. Only when you're ready." He glanced at the quadruplets. "And when they're ready." Florence looked at him deeply, absorbing his sincerity, his humility, his brokenness, his healing. Then she said something that surprised him. "Today isn't a wedding, but it can be a celebration." "A celebration?" he echoed. "A celebration of truth," she said. "A celebration of our children. A celebration of what happens when you choose honesty over hiding." The guests nodded, smiling warmly. "And a celebration of grace," she added softly. Wilson lowered his head. "Florence, thank you." She placed her hand over his. "This isn't forgiveness finished," she said quietly. "This is forgiveness begun." He nodded. "I'll take that. With my whole heart." The rest of the evening unfolded like a gentle healing ceremony. Guests gathered around the quadruplets, laughing at their little expressions, cooing with affection. Aisha grabbed a man's tie. Layla waved at a group of elderly women. Xavier fell asleep in Celeste's arms. Marcus kept shouting "Da" at Wilson, melting the hearts of everyone around. Even Marisol joined the circle, kneeling beside the stroller with a surprising softness. "They're beautiful," she said to Florence. Florence smiled. "Thank you." Marisol hesitated, then whispered, "I hope you heal." Florence replied, "We all deserve that." Their exchange was brief but powerful, a quiet moment where two women chose peace over bitterness. As the celebration wound down, Wilson stood beside Florence, both watching the babies who were now dozing peacefully. The lights dimmed, the music softened. A calm settled over the ballroom. Florence whispered, "This wasn't how I pictured today." Wilson chuckled sadly. "Me neither, but," she added softly, "maybe it was how it needed to happen." He turned toward her. "As long as it leads us home." She looked at him deeply, not with the eyes of a woman forgetting the past, but with the eyes of a woman ready to rebuild the future. Perhaps slowly, perhaps cautiously, but willingly. Florence nodded. "We'll see where the road takes us." And for the first time since their heartbreak began, Wilson allowed himself to smile honestly. A smile of relief, a smile of gratitude, a smile of beginning again. Morning sunlight spread across the city like a quiet blessing, warm and gentle after a night filled with emotion. Chicago felt different now, softer, more forgiving, less like the battlefield Florence had been navigating alone for months. Today was the beginning of something new. Florence stood on the balcony of Wilson's penthouse, the same place she once visited with uncertainty and shy excitement, long before pregnancy, long before stress, long before heartbreak. The wind brushed against her royal blue dress from yesterday, still draped over the chair behind her. She hadn't slept much, but she wasn't exhausted. Her spirit felt lighter. Inside the penthouse, the quadruplets laughed as Wilson clumsily attempted to feed all four at once. The sounds echoed through the hallway, tiny giggles, babbles, and Wilson's dramatic sighs. Florence smiled at the chaos. This was the real beginning. Not the ballroom, not the confrontation, not even the forgiveness. This, morning light, 4 babies and a man trying as hard as he possibly could, was the start of their healing. She walked back inside, tying her hair loosely. Wilson looked up, cheeks dusted with baby oatmeal and a bib hanging from his shoulder. "Florence, I swear they're conspiring against me." Aisha slapped the tray of her high chair. Oatmeal splattered onto Wilson's shirt. Florence chuckled softly. "I think they're just welcoming you to parenthood." He grinned sheepishly. "Parenthood is loud and beautiful," she added, lifting Layla from her seat. Wilson nodded, voice softening. "Yes, very beautiful." Their eyes met, not with the fragile tension of yesterday, but with the quiet warmth of two people learning to breathe again. Later that afternoon, as the babies napped, Florence and Wilson sat together on the couch with warm mugs in hand. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, gentle, alive with possibility. "There's something I want to show you," Wilson said suddenly. Florence raised a brow. "What is it?" He leaned forward and slid a folder across the coffee table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside were architectural sketches, documents, letters, city approval drafts. At the top of the first page, "Sponsored by W. Grant Holdings," Florence's breath hitched. "I started the project months ago," Wilson said, voice calm but vulnerable. "I didn't know how to fix anything, but I knew I wanted your dream to live, even when I wasn't strong enough to stand beside you." Her fingers gently traced her name, at the top of the document. He continued softly, "I hoped that one day you'd let me help bring something good into the world." Tears filled Florence's eyes, not tears of pain, tears of recognition. "You remembered," she whispered. "How could I forget?" He replied, "It was the first dream you ever shared with me." The community center, her lifelong wish to build a safe space for Chicago. Children, especially Black youth in underserved neighborhoods. She spoke about it years ago under the rain, leaning against him, describing a place where kids could learn, dance, read, play, and feel seen. Florence closed the folder slowly. "Wilson, this is beautiful, but we barely know where we stand yet." "I know," he whispered. "And I'm not asking for anything. Not trust, not forgiveness, not a relationship. I'm just saying, if you still want this, I want to build it with you." Florence stared at him, searching his face for sincerity. She found it. Deep, steady, real sincerity. She exhaled. "Let's take everything one step at a time." He nodded. "One step is all I'm hoping for." Over the next few weeks, life reshaped itself. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, like a steady sunrise. Florence began moving her things into the new home Wilson purchased in the suburbs, a spacious, warm house with a backyard that could hold toys, laughter, and future birthday parties. The house wasn't flashy. It wasn't a mansion. It was perfect. A yellow front door, a porch swing, a neighborhood park just 3 blocks away. "Florence deserves peace," Wilson had said when he bought it. "And the children deserve somewhere to grow." The move happened slowly and deliberately. Nothing rushed, nothing assumed. Every step taken with respect, clarity, and honesty. Kwame visited often, carrying bags of baby clothes and talking loudly enough to wake all 4 children at once. Celeste stopped by too, something Florence never expected. One afternoon, Celeste stood in the kitchen, holding a small basket of muffins. "You look happy," she said awkwardly. Florence smiled warmly. "I'm getting there." Celeste nodded, her eyes glancing toward the quadruplets napping in their swings. "They're beautiful," Celeste whispered, "and they're not the reason anything ended. Please know that." Florence placed a hand over Celeste's. "Thank you. I mean that." Healing came in small conversations like this. Soft, unforced, grown from honesty. Marisol also reached out, not with bitterness, but with grace. She came by one Saturday afternoon, carrying a bag of toys she said her nieces recommended. Florence opened the door. "Marisol." "Hey." Marisol smiled faintly. "I wanted to wish you well. All of you." The conversation was simple, polite, tender in a quiet way. Proof that adults could choose peace even when hearts had been tangled in painful knots. Florence didn't hold grudges. She didn't see the point. She wanted her children to grow up in a world where grace wasn't rare. Meanwhile, the community center planning shifted from dream to action. Meetings, blueprints, budget planning, neighborhood feedback, hiring staff. Wilson showed up for everything, not out of guilt, but out of real commitment. Florence watched him listen to mothers from the South Side explain the lack of after-school programs. She saw him kneel to greet children who peeked curiously into the construction trailer. She watched him take notes, ask questions, and adjust plans. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to grow. One evening, as they walked across the future playground area, Florence paused. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. Wilson's steps froze. "Me? Yes. You're doing the work, and it matters." He swallowed hard. "Florence, hearing that from you, Means more than you know. She slipped her hand into his, not tightly, but not hesitantly either. Just naturally, a new beginning wrapped in a simple gesture. The quadruplets grew quickly during this period of rebuilding. Aisha was the bold one, crawling straight toward anything she wasn't supposed to touch. Layla smiled at every adult she met. Xavier stared seriously at every new vegetable he was introduced to. Marcus kept shouting "Duh" at anything resembling his father, including a garden gnome. Some nights, the chaos in the house reached comical levels. Kwame once found himself holding Aisha upside down while trying to burp her. Celeste burned a pot of rice while laughing at Marcus's attempt to climb a laundry basket. Marisol sent baby socks that mismatched on purpose because she said it builds personality. It wasn't a traditional family. It was something better, a community, a circle bound not by perfection, but by love, responsibility, and forgiveness. One evening, as the sun set over the new backyard, Florence stood holding Xavier while watching the other three crawl across a blanket. Wilson stepped beside her. "Florence?" "Yes? Can I tell you something?" She turned toward him slowly. "Sure." He inhaled deeply. "These last few weeks, they've taught me something about life. Something I should have learned earlier." Florence lifted Xavier to her shoulder and listened closely. "I've realized," Wilson said quietly, "that love isn't just what you feel, it's what you choose, every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Florence felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm choosing this," he continued. "Choosing you, choosing them, choosing to grow, choosing to take responsibility, choosing to be present." She met his eyes. "And I'm choosing to believe you," she replied. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a vow. It was something stronger, a beginning rooted in truth. By the end of the month, the community center foundation was poured. The walls began to rise. A muralist arrived to sketch designs inspired by Florence's childhood neighborhood. Volunteers from across Chicago offered help. Florence stood at the construction site one morning, holding Aisha on her hip. Wilson walked beside her, carrying Marcus. Layla and Xavier sat in a stroller with bright blankets. The foreman walked over smiling. "Looks like the whole family approves." Florence laughed softly. "We do." Wilson leaned closer. "All of this, because you dared to dream." She touched the small hand Marcus had wrapped around her sleeve. "And because you dared to change," she whispered. The center would open in a few months, but the legacy was already alive. And so was the love. The grand opening of the community center arrived on a crisp Saturday morning, the kind of day Chicago seemed to reserve for beginnings. The sky shone clear, the air mellow, and families began gathering early on the sidewalk, waiting for the ribbon cutting. Florence stood at the entrance beneath a newly installed sign, "The Florence Foundation Community Center, where families grow, learn, and rise together." She held Marcus on her hip, while the other three sat in their stroller beneath a soft blanket. Wilson stood beside her, adjusting the tiny bow tie Layla kept pulling off her dress. Everything felt full circle, but not in a dramatic way. In a quiet, grounded, deeply human way. Volunteers hustled around, setting up tables for snacks, arranging chairs, placing balloons, preparing the children's reading room for its first visitors. Laughter floated across the courtyard like music, families greeting one another. Greeting Florence, greeting Wilson. It was the first time in a long time they stood side by side without distance between them. A year ago, they were broken. Today, they were standing in the middle of a dream they rebuilt together. Florence kissed the top of Marcus's head. "You ready, baby?" Marcus clapped excitedly. "Yay!" The small crowd behind them chuckled. Wilson stepped closer. "He definitely has your excitement." Florence grinned. "And your smile." He touched Marcus's back gently. "Best combination we could have asked for." When the mayor arrived, the courtyard erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and a few photographers snapped pictures of the quadruplets, who seemed to enjoy the attention. Aisha even waved at one of them, making her father laugh loudly. During the ceremony, the mayor invited Florence to speak first. She stepped forward, heart steady and full. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "This center isn't just a building, it's a promise to every child who needs a safe place, every parent who needs support, and every dreamer who ever felt overlooked." She held back a swell of emotion. This started as my personal dream, she continued, but it became something more when we built it together. Community is love in action, healing is love in practice, and legacy is love that continues long after we're gone. Her eyes drifted to the babies, who were in the front row under the gentle watch of Celeste and Kwame. And these 4 little blessings, she said with a warm smile, remind me every day that life's greatest miracles often come from life's hardest moments. The audience nodded, touched. Some wiped tears. Florence finished with, "This center stands as proof that broken beginnings can grow into beautiful futures. Thank you for believing in us." The applause was thunderous. When it was Wilson's turn, he approached the microphone slowly. His suit was tailored, his posture strong, but his humility was unmistakable. "I don't deserve to be up here," he began plainly. "Not for praise, not for attention, not for applause." The crowd quieted. "I'm standing here because I learned the hardest, most humbling lesson of my life. You cannot outrun responsibility, and you cannot hide from the truth." Florence watched him closely. He continued, voice soft but steady. "I spent years of my life chasing success, the kind you can measure in money, houses, career titles. And I ignored the kind of success that matters most: love, presence, family, and the courage to choose them." A wave of silence fell over the courtyard. "These 4 children," Wilson gestured toward the stroller, "they gave me a second chance to become the kind of man I should have been all along." He turned to Florence now, emotion thick in his voice. "And she gave me the grace to grow, to try again, to show up, not perfectly but honestly." Florence felt her heart tug. He concluded, "If this center accomplishes anything, let it teach every person who walks through these doors what I had to learn the hard way. Love is responsibility. Love is action. Love is showing up even when you feel unprepared. And sometimes, love brings you back home." The crowd erupted again, but this time, the applause carried something deeper: respect. After the ribbon was cut, children rushed into the center with wide eyes. The reading corner filled immediately. The dance studio echoed with excited footsteps. Parents toured the tutoring rooms and resource areas. Florence watched it all with awe. "This is really happening," she whispered. Wilson slipped beside her. "You made it happen." "We," she corrected softly. "We did." He let the words settle. Once it had frightened him. Now it grounded him. "Florence?" he asked gently. "Yes, there's something I want to give you." She blinked, curious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch, not a ring box, not jewelry, not anything that hinted at pressure. Inside was a gold necklace with 5 small pendants, one shaped like the letter F, and 4 tiny charms, each engraved with the initials of a child: Aisha, Layla, Xavier, Marcus. Florence's breath caught. "It's not a symbol of what I expect," Wilson said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's a symbol of what I'm committed to. You and our children." Her fingers brushed the necklace, and she felt something soften inside her, the last remnant of doubt slowly giving way. "Wilson," she whispered, touched beyond words, "this is beautiful." "Not as beautiful as the family that saved me," he replied. Florence looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who had walked through shame, guilt, sleepless nights, fear, and responsibility, yet still stood with humility and love. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded. "One day, when you're ready, I'd like to talk about rebuilding our relationship." Florence didn't pull away. She smiled instead, tender, calm, honest. "I think we're already rebuilding it," she replied. For the first time in a long time, Wilson allowed himself to breathe fully. Later that evening, after visitors trickled away and volunteers packed up equipment, Florence sat on the steps of the center, holding the sleeping babies. Wilson sat beside her, one arm resting behind her for support. Downtown lights shimmered in the distance. Cars hummed softly on the street. The city breathed with them. "I used to think love was supposed to be easy," Florence said quietly. "So did I," Wilson admitted. "But it's not," she continued. "Love asks you to grow, to listen, to forgive, to show up even when you're tired, and to stay even when fear tells you to run." Wilson lowered his eyes. "I ran once, but I won't run again. I know, she whispered. Silence embraced them. Warm, peaceful, comforting. Florence leaned her head against his shoulder. Not as a promise, not as a declaration, but as a beginning born from pain, shaped by truth, strengthened by grace, and carried by 4 little blessings who brought them back together. The world had seen the scandal, the world had seen the collapse, but now the world would see the rebuilding, one choice at a time. Florence lifted Marcus, who stirred softly. Do you think they'll remember this day? She asked. Wilson smiled. No, but they'll feel it. They'll grow up knowing they were loved, wanted, seen, and celebrated. Florence nodded. That's all I ever wanted. Wilson wrapped his arm around her gently, protective, but not possessive. And that's all I'll ever work for, he replied. She looked at him, seeing truth in his eyes. Not the truth of perfection, the truth of effort. The truth of maturity, the truth of a man who learned his lesson and lived it. Love really does bring us back home, she whispered. Yes, he said. Home isn't a place, it's the people who choose you. Florence squeezed his hand. And we're choosing each other, she murmured. They watched the city lights together, the beginning of a new chapter, not tied to wedding vows or dramatic announcements, but tied to the quiet strength of 2 people rebuilding a family with humility, honesty, and love. The quadruplets slept peacefully between them, their soft breaths filling the cool evening air, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Everything felt earned. Everything felt like home. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Mr. Michael Stories. Your support allows us to keep creating meaningful stories filled with lessons, love, and truth.